In this video, I'm going to be talking about uniform resource identifiers. It's a compact string of characters for resource identification. Really what it is it's going to be a path to reach or find a resource. You are probably familiar with URLs, so I have here highlighted example.com. URIs are more general. So another kind of URI is URN, and so if you've ever looked up a particular book, you might be able to find it with its ISBN number. The URI is going to answer questions like, what server is it on? How do I ask the server? And then how does the server locate the resource? Okay, so that's a little bit abstract. So let's kind of break down a URI. The general syntax of a URI is going to be a scheme, which is some sort of protocol. That is things like HTTP or FTP. We also are familiar with SFTP, which is secure FTP. And we've also seen HTTPS, which is secure HTTP. And so the authority then is the entity that controls the interpretation of the rest of the URI. It's often a server name, so you're usually going to see this as the username at the host, followed by the port. And so we're somewhat familiar with that from SSH, where we have done our username at wherever we want to go. There's going to be a path, which is resource location. This is a hierarchical path name. And so we are familiar with path names in terms of our file folders, knowing that they're typically separated by slash to go to subfolders. URLs and URIs are going to look exactly the same. You might have a query or a fragment as well. These are optional. Looking at components of the authority, there's user info, there's the host, and then there's going to be the port. And so I talked about things like username at, or using maybe a password at example.com. And so that's something you've done where you've like logged in with your username at remote.eos.ncsu.edu. And so that's an example of using that, where it's locating that for you. Some other examples that I'd like to bring up here for URIs. Let me go back here with this general syntax. Another one that you might have seen is a mail to. So you might see mail to, unity at ncsu.edu. That is another example of a scheme that has some portions, but not all of these parts. I think another good example is if you go to Wikipedia. Wikipedia is HTTPS, that's going to be my scheme, and then it's going to be typically n.wikipedia.org if you're on English Wikipedia, /wiki for a path name, / maybe you look up beep, and we can also continue on with a fragment. If you click on the side of Wikipedia on one of the subcontents, you could find out something about beeping with paging, for example, if that's a subcategory you're interested in, and that will scroll you down to the proper part of that website to read that section. There are these reserved characters, so things like spaces, you cannot have those in URLs. And so, for example, we might say, okay, I'm going to this website, example.com, and then, I'm going to separate out my path And then maybe I'm looking at example 3. But example 3, the way it's saved is with spaces. And so to actually see that, it would be example %20 a.html. You can, in fact, type those in yourself, but typically what you're going to do is you would do something like search something that has spaces in it. And then if you do that, you might see that % in your URL. A lot of times we are smart about saving things in our websites such that we use underscores instead, and that way we don't have to deal with the special characters. We can look at a couple more examples of URLs and URIs here, but here I want to point out specifically the concept of having an absolute URI, which has this whole piece with the HTTPS. That's included, and then it starts at www.example.com. This is the absolute location of the resource. A URI can also specify a location relative to the current resource. So if you were already on the network path and you knew what you knew that I was on example.com anyway, perhaps I would just do something like example.com example demo.html. It can also be relative to the current authority, and we can do current authorities and paths. So you can also see that ... to say I'm looking at the folder above and maybe something after that. And with this one, I would just kind of point out that typically the reason you would see this is if you wanted to hyperlink your pages to one another when making a website, you might want to use relative references for that. The context is always important. I think one more example I'd like to show you is you could do everything locally. So you could do localhost. If you just wanted to see a website locally, you could do 8080 test. All right, so this 8080 is my port. If you want to find out more, there is an RFC for it, which talks about URIs in a lot of detail. It talks about how to encode, parse, and use URIs. So I'll just click on that real quick to see what's on here. Looks like it obsoletes out old standards, and you can kind of take a look if you really wanted to read all this to see specifically how URIs look. And you can see many more examples here.